In the annals of history, power is a fragile currency. The corridors of influence often paved not with loyalty, but with ambition. This is the story of a leader who, by vision and force, rose to prominence, only to be undone by the very allies who once championed his cause. He came from modest beginnings, a figure of intellect and determination, rising amid a turbulent era when nations were forged and old powers fractured. His ascent was meteoric, admired by the people, feared by opponents. Policies he enacted promised prosperity. Reforms he championed inspired hope. Yet, beneath the surface, currents of distrust and envy were gathering strength. The story of his downfall is not one of a single betrayal, but of a network of ambitions, where loyalty was transactional and power, the ultimate prize, was the only truth. He was a master strategist, a man who understood the delicate balance between influence and authority. With every decision, he calculated not just the immediate gains, but the long-term legacy. Early in his leadership, he consolidated power with precision, appointing trusted aides, forming coalitions, and navigating the labyrinthine politics of his time. Yet, in the shadows of his triumphs, the seeds of discord were planted. Those closest to him, trusted ministers, confidants, military leaders, began to see opportunities for their own rise. Ambition, when unchecked, is a potent force. And when ambition intertwines with proximity to power, even the closest ally can become a rival. Historical records reveal subtle cracks, delayed orders, whispers in corridors, unacknowledged grievances. Small decisions, ignored, underestimated, would soon swell into a tide capable of engulfing even the most formidable leader. For a time, stability endued. His policies yielded tangible results. Infrastructure projects transformed cities. Trade flourished. Diplomacy, carefully executed, kept enemies at bay. The populace hailed him as a visionary. Allies, for a moment, remained seemingly loyal. But history teaches us that peace, when built on personal ambition rather than shared principles, is fragile. While public victories were celebrated, private conversations betrayed growing discontent. Some aides questioned his vision, others envied his authority. In these private chambers, alliances shifted like sand, subtly and without warning. Every great leader encounters opposition. What distinguishes history's fallen from its remembered is the nature of betrayal. And betrayal, often, arrives not from the outside, but from within. The first fractures were almost imperceptible. A delayed report here, a missing signature there, orders that were subtly ignored. To the untrained eye, minor mistakes. To the experienced observer, the first tremors of an impending collapse. Historians would later trace the beginnings of his undoing to a single incident, a pivotal decision ignored by an ally, a council vote subverted, a promise broken. It was not dramatic, not public. Yet it was the opening act of a tragedy that would unfold with relentless precision. In these moments, the leader's brilliance was both a blessing and a curse. His vision was vast, encompassing realms beyond immediate control. Yet in trusting those closest, he exposed himself to the quiet, calculated erosion of his authority. As the cracks widened, alliances became negotiations. Loyalty was no longer a given, it was a currency. Friends became rivals, and rivals became opportunists. The leader, once the architect of every success, now found himself navigating a labyrinth of deceit. Every decision was scrutinized, every action questioned. Allies who had once shared in his victories now plotted in silence, each seeking leverage, each hoping to claim the mantle of power for themselves. In the end, it was not brute force or foreign enemy that toppled him, but the cumulative weight of those he trusted most. It was subtle, invisible, inevitable, perfect. We'll continue building the immersive, long-form narrative, keeping the calm, cinematic, authoritative tone, third-person narration only. I'll proceed with the next chapters, gradually taking the story through the middle of the leader's rise and fall arc. The leader's vision, once universally lauded, began to encounter resistance, not from rivals outside, but from the very allies he had empowered. Ministers he had elevated now questioned the merit of his policies, advisers plotted behind closed doors, and generals, once loyal to the core, weighed the benefits of shifting allegiance. Small acts of defiance multiplied quietly. Meetings were postponed, recommendations dismissed, orders delayed. To the populace, the government seemed stable. Beneath the veneer, tension rippled through every layer of administration. Historians later observe that the earliest signs of collapse were rarely dramatic. They were quiet, cumulative, and imperceptible to those blinded by success. Ambition, untempered by loyalty, had begun to weave a web that would soon entrap the leader himself. Betrayal rarely arrives announced. It creeps, and when it does, its impact is magnified by the trust it violates. The leader's first serious setback came not from a rival state, nor a public uprising, but from a trusted minister, entrusted with critical decisions and the execution of strategy. A policy, crafted with care over months, was sabotaged quietly. Communications intercepted, resources misallocated. The consequences were immediate: a failed initiative, public dissatisfaction, and a subtle erosion of the leader's authority. Yet, even in this moment, he underestimated the breadth of the threat. He saw one act of defiance as isolated, failing to recognize the coordinated undercurrent of ambition flowing beneath his administration. The inner circle, once the backbone of his administration, was no longer a source of strength. Old friendships became fragile alliances, and loyalty became negotiable. Meetings that were once unified in purpose now devolved into subtle power plays. Advisors whispered alternative strategies, generals pursued private objectives, and allies weighed the personal benefits of their allegiance. The leader's brilliance had made him a visionary, but it also blinded him to the rising threat from within. He remained focused on policy, on reform, on the vision he alone could see. Yet history is unforgiving to those who fail to read the intentions of those closest to them. The fractures widened, invisible to the public eye, yet undeniable to those who understood the subtle language of betrayal. Every downfall has a moment, a pivot when potential becomes reality. For this leader, the turning point arrived during a critical decision involving the nation's strategic resources. A plan, months in the making, was rendered ineffective by coordinated delays, misreporting, and sabotage by trusted allies. The repercussions were immediate. Public confidence faltered, opposition factions gained leverage, and allies who had once hidden their discontent now acted with boldness. The leader, for the first time, confronted the undeniable truth. The threat was not external. It was within. Historians often describe this moment as the point where trust became the weapon of his enemies. And yet, he persevered, attempting to navigate the treacherous waters of internal dissent while maintaining the illusion of control. Isolation is both a consequence and a catalyst. As allies defected, the leader found himself increasingly alone, reliant only on the dwindling cadre of loyal advisors. Decisions became fraught with uncertainty. Every choice carried the weight of potential betrayal. Publicly, he remained calm. In private, the corridors of power grew lonely and perilous. The very mechanisms he had built to govern now turned into instruments of his undoing. Letters went unanswered, advice disregarded, and alliances fractured. Isolation magnifies vulnerability. And in this solitude, the leader's greatest strength, his intellect, was rendered insufficient against the calculated ambition of those he had once trusted most. By this stage, the leader's downfall was no longer a possibility, it was imminent. What had begun as small acts of defiance had coalesced into a full-scale conspiracy. Allies he had elevated were now orchestrating decisions to undermine him, divert resources, and manipulate public perception. The mechanics of betrayal are intricate. Every leaked memo, every delayed initiative, every hidden agenda contributed to the inevitable unraveling of authority. And yet, even as the web tightened, he clung to the hope that loyalty could be restored, underestimating the depth of ambition surrounding him. The stage was set. The leader, brilliant but betrayed, was about to face the ultimate consequence, the collapse of everything he had built. The first cracks in public confidence appeared subtly, almost imperceptibly. Rumors of inefficiency, whispers of mismanagement, and the discreet manipulations of his inner circle began to circulate. Citizens, once ardent supporters, questioned decisions that had once inspired trust. Media, carefully monitored, now reflected the growing discontent. Allies who had gained influence were shaping public opinion, framing the leader's actions as miscalculations, even failures. The narrative of competence that had once surrounded him began to erode, piece by piece, in the hands of those who had long concealed their ambitions. What history reveals is that the fall of power rarely begins in the halls of government. It begins in the perception of the governed. The leader's first undeniable public betrayal came during a council vote on a critical economic policy. Allies he had trusted openly challenged his proposal, proposing alternatives that undermined his authority. The vote, once a formality, turned into a spectacle of dissent. The public witnessed, for the first time, a fragmentation of unity within the administration. Supporters were unsettled, opponents emboldened, and those within the inner circle who had not yet acted now began to calculate their moves with precision. It was no longer speculation. The betrayal was visible, undeniable, and consequential. History remembers it as the moment when confidence faltered, not just in the leader, but in the stability of the entire system he had built. The first tangible consequence of internal betrayal was a loss of strategic control, territorial, economic, or political. Initiatives that had been carefully planned failed. Resources intended for critical programs were misallocated. Allies on the periphery withheld support, or worse, diverted it entirely. The leader's vision, ambitious and far-reaching, began to crumble under the weight of obstruction. Decisions that had once been executed with precision now faltered. The machinery of governance, once seamless, became tangled in competing agendas and quiet sabotage. Observers of history note that no leader falls from power overnight. It is the accumulation of small, orchestrated failures that catalyze a collapse, and this was the first of many. Allies who had once shared in triumph now pursued their own agendas. Relationships built on trust and shared purpose gave way to calculated rivalry. Those closest to the leader, trusted ministers, generals, and advisors, now acted independently, motivated by personal ambition rather than collective success. The leader's brilliance was a double-edged sword. His vision was unmatched, but his focus on policy and principle left him vulnerable to those who recognized the value of manipulation. Trust, the foundation of his authority, had become a weapon wielded against him. Every decision was scrutinized, every move anticipated. The corridors of power had become a chessboard, and the leader, despite his intellect, was no longer controlling the game. As setbacks multiplied, confidence eroded, not only among citizens but within the administration itself. Advisors questioned directives, generals hesitated to act, and allies debated whether their loyalty still served their interests. The leader, aware of the growing tensions but unable to fully identify the orchestrators, faced a crisis of governance. Every policy became a potential battlefield, every decision a potential failure. Historians have noted that the erosion of authority rarely occurs through a single, dramatic act. It accumulates, quietly and insidiously, until the foundation is too weak to sustain even the most capable of leaders. Isolation became more pronounced. Those who remained loyal were too few to influence outcomes decisively. Private discussions revealed skepticism, even among those who had once championed his vision. In solitude, the leader grappled with the realization that intelligence and foresight could not compensate for the absence of trust. He reviewed strategies, recalculated approaches, and sought to repair fractures, but the momentum of betrayal was relentless. It was a quiet, personal struggle, invisible to the public, yet decisive in shaping the trajectory of his eventual downfall. The pace of betrayal intensified. Allies, emboldened by their successes, acted with greater audacity. Policies were stalled, initiatives obstructed, and resources misdirected. Public confidence waned further. What had been subtle manipulation transformed into coordinated obstruction. The leader, increasingly aware of the scale of the conspiracy, attempted to confront the dissent, but the network of betrayal had grown too vast, too entrenched. Every day brought new challenges, each a test of endurance and adaptability. And yet, even as the walls closed in, he persisted, driven by conviction, but constrained by the reality of fractured alliances. The cumulative effect of internal sabotage reached a tipping point. Allies no longer hid their ambitions. They openly maneuvered for power, using the leader's own policies and successes as instruments against him. Public opinion mirrored the division within the administration. Citizens who had once celebrated his achievements now questioned his competence. The leader's authority, once unquestioned, became contested at every level. The tide had turned. What had begun as quiet erosion now became an unstoppable force, threatening to sweep away all he had built. Inevitably, confrontation emerged. Allies who had plotted in silence revealed their intentions openly, challenging directives, undermining initiatives, and asserting their own agendas. The leader, confronted by those he had once trusted implicitly, found negotiation and diplomacy insufficient. The inner circle, fractured and ambitious, no longer deferred to his authority. Decisions became battles, conversations became tests of endurance, and leadership became a daily exercise in survival. This period of confrontation, historians argue, is pivotal. It demonstrates how internal betrayal, more than any external force, can destabilize even the most accomplished leader. By the end of this chapter of history, the first unmistakable signs of collapse were evident. Key initiatives failed, allies openly defied orders, and public confidence waned. The leader's influence, once expansive and unchallenged, was now circumscribed, controlled by forces that had once been instruments of his authority. Yet even in the shadow of decline, he remained determined, analyzing strategies, seeking solutions, and attempting to reclaim control. But history would record that the weight of betrayal is often heavier than any leader can bear. By this stage, the collapse was no longer gradual, it was accelerating. Decisions that had once shaped nations now faltered under the weight of obstruction. Allies who had been passive critics now acted as active adversaries, controlling crucial levers of power and manipulating the machinery of governance. The leader's brilliance, once a beacon of vision, was insufficient against coordinated betrayal. Policies failed, projects stalled, and public faith eroded. Citizens who had celebrated him now questioned his judgment, unaware that the greatest threat came not from external enemies, but from those entrusted to uphold his vision. Subtle acts of sabotage transformed into overt rebellion. Allies openly defied his directives, publicly challenging his authority and undermining initiatives he had spent years crafting. The inner circle, once loyal, now became the engine of his decline. Each confrontation exposed the fragility of his position. Friends who had once shared his victories now wielded ambition like a weapon, and the leader, despite his intellect and foresight, struggled to contain the forces arrayed against him. The betrayal was no longer hidden, it was visible, undeniable, and devastating. Isolation deepened. Advisors who remained loyal were too few to influence events decisively. Every decision became a high-stakes gamble. Allies manipulated information, delayed communications, and distorted public perception to serve their own ascent. The leader, aware of the conspiracy's breadth, found himself trapped between loyalty and survival. The very people he had elevated now orchestrated the mechanisms of his undoing, leaving him alone in a labyrinth of deception. Isolation magnified vulnerability, and in this solitude, even the sharpest mind could not foresee every strike. As internal betrayal grew, public confidence shattered. Citizens, once ardent supporters, now doubted his judgment and questioned the stability of his administration. Opposition forces exploited these fractures, amplifying dissent and consolidating power. The leader's authority, built on competence and vision, became a fragile facade. His once unifying presence was now a symbol of uncertainty, undermined not by his failures alone, but by the careful orchestration of those who had once pledged allegiance. Those who had betrayed him now gained the upper hand. Allies once subordinate now commanded authority, diverting resources, manipulating narratives, and consolidating power. Their rise was methodical, deliberate, and ruthless. The leader, who had spent a lifetime mastering strategy and governance, now faced adversaries who had learned his methods and exploited his vulnerabilities. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted, and history would remember this moment as the definitive reversal of fortune. Desperate to regain control, the leader attempted countermeasures. Strategies were revised, alliances renegotiated, and initiatives recalibrated. Yet every action was anticipated, every move counted, and every opportunity for recovery obstructed. What had once been calculated, methodical governance now became a series of reactive maneuvers, each less effective than the last. The momentum of betrayal proved overwhelming, demonstrating that even brilliance cannot withstand coordinated internal opposition. The consequences of betrayal were not limited to power alone. They were profoundly personal. Relationships strained under suspicion, friendships fractured, and allies who had once been confidants became sources of grief and humiliation. Historians note that for leaders, the emotional toll of betrayal is often as decisive as the political. In solitude, the leader confronted the realization that ambition, when unchecked, can corrode both public authority and private trust. The personal cost was immeasurable, a shadow that would linger long after the collapse was complete. Inevitably, confrontation became unavoidable. The leader faced his betrayers openly, attempting to negotiate, persuade, and reclaim control. But by this stage, alliances were solidified, loyalty had eroded, and the conspirators were unyielding. Every argument, every appeal, was met with resistance. Every attempt to assert authority was countered with strategy, manipulation, and the silent weight of ambition. History marks this confrontation as the moment when the inevitability of downfall became clear, not through a single catastrophic event, but through the cumulative power of betrayal. With conspirators in control, public support waning, and policies failing, the leader's authority collapsed. Decisions he had once made unchallenged now went ignored. Initiatives that had defined his vision were dismantled. Allies, once instruments of governance, had become agents of his undoing. Power, it seemed, had shifted irrevocably. What he had built through intellect, vision, and diligence was now dismantled by those he had trusted most. The collapse was not sudden. It was the logical outcome of months, even years, of subtle, orchestrated betrayal. Ultimately, the leader was removed from power, not by an external enemy, but by the very allies he had elevated. Exile, forced resignation, or confinement. History records variations, but the outcome is the same, the complete reversal of fortune. The nation, the public, and the administration he had shaped were now under new stewardship. The man who had once held unparalleled authority faced the consequences of misplaced trust and tempered ambition and the inexorable logic of internal betrayal. History preserves his story not merely as a cautionary tale of loss, but as a profound lesson on the fragility of power and the dangers of unguarded alliances. With the former leader removed, a new order emerged. The administration he had built was now governed by those who had once conspired against him. Policies were rewritten, priorities shifted, and the nation began to heal, or at least adapt, to a new reality. For historians, this moment is crucial. It demonstrates how power is never static, and how the absence of trust within a leadership structure can destabilize even the most competent government. What remained of the leader's vision persisted only in fragments, reshaped by those who survived the struggle for supremacy. Exile brought solitude. The leader, once at the center of influence, now observed events from a distance. Advisors who had served him faithfully were marginalized or purged. Former allies who betrayed him now dictated policy and public narrative. Isolation became both a punishment and a lens for reflection. He pondered the choices he had made, the trust he had given, and the subtle signals he had ignored. In these quiet years, he understood, perhaps too late, that power is as much about loyalty as it is about strategy. The exile of a leader is rarely complete in historical records. Memory preserves their actions, their vision, and the lessons of their fall for generations yet to come. History, in its unyielding clarity, examines both triumph and failure. The rise of this leader showcased intellect, ambition, and vision. His fall, equally, demonstrates the fragility of authority when loyalty is absent. Scholars debate endlessly whether his demise was inevitable or whether different choices, more caution, stricter oversight of allies, or swifter responses to dissent, could have altered his fate. Yet, the broader lesson remains. Even the most capable leader is vulnerable when surrounded by ambition and tempered by principle. Betrayal, when orchestrated from within, carries consequences that extend beyond the individual. The nation itself felt the tremors. Policies stalled, projects failed, and public confidence wavered. The damage, though less visible than conquest or war, was no less profound. For the leader, the cost was personal. Reputation, relationships, and authority all eroded. And for the allies who betrayed him, the aftermath was not without its own complexities. Power won is never without scrutiny, and the shadow of history waits to pass judgment. Legacy is rarely a single, unbroken narrative. What survives of this leader's vision exists in fragments, programs that endured, policies adapted, lessons learned. Yet the story of his fall dominates memory, a cautionary tale for leaders and citizens alike. In the balance of history, brilliance can inspire, but betrayal can erase. Authority, once seized with determination, can be undone quietly, methodically, and invisibly. The measure of a leader, some historians argue, is not merely in the power they wield, but in the structures of loyalty and trust they cultivate. The story of a leader undone by his own allies offers lessons that resonate across centuries. Intelligence, vision, and decisiveness insufficient when loyalty falters. Power must be exercised not only with strategy, but with vigilance over those entrusted to share it. This narrative serves as a study of human ambition, illustrating how internal threats, subtle, patient, and pervasive, can dismantle even the most capable ruler. The tragedy lies not in external conquest, but in the quiet, calculated betrayal of those once deemed friends. At the heart of every political story is the human element: trust, ambition, loyalty, fear. This leader's journey illuminates the delicate balance between these forces. Allies, motivated by personal gain, reshaped history. Citizens, responding to uncertainty, influenced the course of governance. Even in grandeur, leadership is profoundly human. Miscalculations, oversights, and the misreading of ambition have consequences that ripple far beyond the individual, shaping nations and leaving lessons for those who follow. Betrayal leaves echoes that resonate long after the immediate events have passed. Policies are rewritten, history books debated, and leadership structures adjusted to prevent repetition. The memory of the leader's downfall became a touchstone, a story cited by scholars, leaders, and citizens alike. It reminded all that ambition, untempered by principle, can corrode institutions, friendships, and even the brightest vision. History is a mirror, reflecting the timeless interplay of power, loyalty, and ambition. The story of this leader endures not solely as a narrative of failure, but as a lens through which we examine human nature. His brilliance is remembered, his policies partially preserved. But the lesson of betrayal remains paramount. Leadership is as much about safeguarding alliances and trust as it is about intellect, strategy, or vision. The past, relentless in its clarity, preserves both the triumphs and the tragedies for those willing to observe and learn. In the end, the story of the leader who lost everything to his own allies is a study in the fragility of power. It teaches that vision alone cannot sustain authority, that loyalty must be cultivated and protected, and that human ambition is both a source of progress and a potential instrument of destruction. History does not simply record victories. It reveals the consequences of trust misplaced, of oversight ignored, and of ambition left unchecked. The legacy of this leader endures as a testament. Power is never permanent, and the greatest adversaries often dwell within. Every great leader begins somewhere. In his case, modest beginnings forged a mind capable of strategy, vision, and determination. Early education instilled discipline. Early mentors nurtured ambition. These formative years shaped not only his intellect but also the expectations he would carry into the corridors of power. Yet history shows that the qualities that build leadership, intelligence, confidence, foresight, can also sow vulnerability. Ambition, and tempered by skepticism toward allies, can leave even the brightest ruler exposed. It is in the foundations of leadership that we see the earliest patterns of both success and failure. Trust is a currency more valuable than gold, and more fragile than glass. In the early days, the leader distributed it generously, empowering allies with authority, access, and responsibility. He believed in competence, loyalty, and shared vision. Yet, as history often demonstrates, trust is transactional. Those empowered for one purpose may pursue another. Subtle shifts, an unrecorded decision, a private meeting, a delayed report, can ripple into catastrophic outcomes. Understanding the anatomy of trust is central to understanding his fall. Betrayal does not strike without preparation. It builds quietly, patiently, and inevitably within the cracks of misplaced confidence. Ambition is neither inherently good nor evil. It is the force that drives humans to act. Within the leader's inner circle, ambition once aligned with his vision. But over time, personal interest eclipsed collective purpose. Historians point to a pattern: small acts of self-interest, tolerated or overlooked, eventually escalate into coordinated opposition. Allies who once celebrated victories now leveraged influence to reshape outcomes to their advantage. Power, it seems, is not solely seized by force. It is often surrendered quietly, through calculation, patience, and betrayal cloaked in loyalty. No downfall is sudden. It is punctuated by miscalculations, misread signals, and overlooked warnings. The leader underestimated subtle resistance from those closest to him. He misjudged loyalty, mistook compliance for conviction, and ignored early indicators of dissent. Each misstep, though minor in isolation, compounded over time. Policies that could have been protected were sabotaged. Initiatives intended to unify were redirected to fracture. History shows that intelligence without vigilance can be perilous, and even vision cannot overcome betrayal embedded within one's own circle. Behind political collapse lies human cost. The leader's personal life, relationships, and health were all affected by the relentless pressures of internal betrayal. Isolation, mistrust, and relentless stress eroded his resilience. Even the most disciplined mind falters under the strain of constant vigilance against those once trusted implicitly. In exile, the personal consequences of political failure weighed heavier than any public loss, reminding us that history is not only a ledger of events but a narrative of human experience. The narrative of betrayal offers timeless lessons. Leaders must cultivate loyalty with foresight, monitor ambition with vigilance, and balance vision with pragmatism. Authority is never absolute. It is contingent upon the faith of those who serve, advise, and influence. For modern governance, his story serves as a case study. Policy alone cannot sustain power. Structures of accountability, alignment of incentives, and awareness of internal ambition are equally vital. The tragedy lies in recognizing these truths only in retrospect. The consequences of internal betrayal are rarely confined to leaders. Societies, economies, and institutions feel the ripple effect. Initiatives faltered, public confidence wavered, and progress stalled. The leader's fall was not merely personal. It reshaped governance, influenced public sentiment, and redirected history itself. betrayal, subtle or overt, demonstrates that the fate of nations is entwined with the ambitions and integrity of those entrusted to power. Historical analysis illuminates patterns invisible to contemporaries. Scholars observe that the leader's downfall followed a familiar trajectory: early success, overextension of trust, unnoticed internal dissent, public erosion of confidence, and final collapse. Yet no analysis diminishes the human story. Triumph and tragedy coexist, and the lessons of loyalty, ambition, and foresight remain as relevant today as they were in his era. History preserves both the victories and the failings with equal clarity. Despite defeat, remnants of his vision persisted. Some policies endured, reshaped by successes. Some initiatives became cautionary examples for future leaders. His influence, though diminished, left an indelible mark on political thought, governance, and historical study. The enduring impact is paradoxical: power lost, yet lessons gained; authority undone, yet insight preserved. History, in recording his story, ensures that the consequences of betrayal, ambition, and miscalculation remain visible for generations to come. The story of the leader who lost everything to his own allies is, ultimately, a meditation on human ambition, loyalty, and the delicate structures of power. Brilliance and vision are not enough. Foresight must extend to the human heart, and authority must be safeguarded through vigilance. History does not forgive negligence. Betrayal leaves echoes, shaping nations, legacies, and the collective understanding of leadership. And in the quiet aftermath, we are left with a profound lesson. The greatest adversaries are often those we trust the most. The fall of a leader at the hands of trusted allies is far from unique. History offers examples across centuries: emperors, kings, generals, and modern politicians undone not by enemies, but by confidants. From ancient courts where ministers plotted silently, to modern administrations where cabinet members undermined leaders, the pattern repeats. Proximity breeds opportunity, and ambition often outweighs loyalty. By studying these parallels, historians gain perspective on how the interplay of trust and power shapes not only individuals but entire civilizations. To understand betrayal, one must look beyond strategy to the human mind. The leader's psychology, his confidence, vision, and idealism, was both his strength and vulnerability. He trusted easily, valued competence over suspicion, and assumed loyalty where ambition silently simmered. Conversely, the allies who betrayed him were motivated by self-interest, fear, and the pursuit of legacy. History shows that betrayal is rarely simple. It is a convergence of circumstance, psychology, and timing, each factor magnifying the others. Betrayal at the top does not remain confined to council chambers or palaces. Its consequences ripple outward, affecting every layer of society. Economic initiatives faltered, public services suffered, and social trust eroded. Citizens, who once invested hope in leadership, experienced uncertainty and disruption. History reminds us that political betrayal is not merely a personal tragedy. It reshapes the social fabric, leaving echoes that endure long after power changes hands. Even as political structures crumbled, the leader confronted a more intimate struggle. Isolation, self-reflection, and the burden of failure weighed heavily. He wrestled with questions of judgment, trust, and the consequences of empowering those who would ultimately betray him. In solitude, he examined not only the decisions he made, but the human dynamics he had underestimated, revealing that leadership is as much an exercise in emotional intelligence as it is in strategy. Loyalty is the bedrock of sustained leadership, yet it is fragile. The leader's story underscores the importance of cultivating trust while simultaneously verifying intentions. History teaches that loyalty cannot be assumed. It must be earned, monitored, and respected. Ambition, when left unchecked, can turn allies into adversaries, friends into foes. And the consequences of misjudging this dynamic can be catastrophic. Ambition is neither inherently virtuous nor corrupting. It is a natural human drive that can achieve greatness or precipitate downfall. Within the leader's inner circle, Ambition once aligned with vision, but slowly diverged. Allies pursued self-interest, subtly redirecting policies and reshaping priorities to serve personal agendas. The delicate balance between ambition and loyalty is central to understanding power. When that balance is lost, even the most formidable leader is vulnerable. The downfall of a leader is not merely political, it is cultural. Communities recalibrate, traditions shift, and societal narratives are rewritten. Festivals, monuments, and public spaces once associated with triumph may lose their significance, while lessons of caution and vigilance become central to collective memory. In this sense, betrayal shapes not only governance but the cultural lens through which history is understood. The story of a leader betrayed by his allies is timeless. Modern administrations echo the same patterns: trust mismanaged, loyalty assumed, ambition left unchecked. The consequences may manifest differently through media influence, institutional power plays, or corporate politics, but the underlying dynamics are remarkably consistent. History, when observed carefully, provides a blueprint for understanding modern leadership and the fragile architecture of power. Ultimately, this story is about human nature. Vision, intelligence, and strategy are necessary for leadership, but insufficient without vigilance over human motives. Betrayal, ambition, and loyalty intersect in ways that define not only the fate of leaders, but the trajectory of nations. The enduring lesson is clear. Those we trust most have the power to elevate or destroy us, and the measure of leadership lies as much in understanding human motives as in executing policy. The leader who lost everything to his own allies remains a cautionary figure, a study in ambition, loyalty, and human complexity. His brilliance, his failures, and his ultimate exile illustrate the fragile equilibrium of power. History preserves this narrative not to vilify, but to illuminate. It reminds us that authority is conditional, trust is precious, and the consequences of misjudging those closest can be irreversible. In reflecting on his life, we understand that power is not merely a tool, it is a responsibility, a relationship, and a delicate balance between human ambition and the bonds that sustain it. Behind every great leader is an inner circle. In this case, that circle became a battlefield of ambition. Advisors, ministers, and generals each pursued personal advantage. Some sought recognition, others influence, and some survival. History shows that the subtleties of internal maneuvering often determine outcomes far more than battles fought in public. In these hidden corridors, trust was tested, alliances forged and broken, and the first strands of ultimate betrayal were woven. These silent acts, small individually, compounded into a force capable of toppling even the most resilient leader. History often overlooks them, but in the anatomy of downfall, they are decisive. Vision, while necessary for leadership, carries its own burden. A leader who sees further than others may outpace those around him, leaving gaps of understanding and opportunity for misalignment. In his case, foresight was unmatched, but the distance between vision and execution became a vulnerability. Allies, entrusted with carrying his ambitions forward, sometimes chose their own course, creating fractures invisible to the eye until too late. A defection, even seemingly minor, can ripple like a shockwave. One advisor withholding approval, one general diverting resources, one minister misreporting data, each seem trivial, yet together they undermine the foundation of governance. History records that downfall is rarely instantaneous. It is the accumulation of small betrayals, patiently orchestrated, each unnoticed until the consequences are undeniable. As internal fractures grew, public perception shifted. Rumors of mismanagement spread. Confidence wavered. Citizens questioned policies they had once celebrated. Betrayal from within often has a dual effect. It destabilizes leadership while eroding the trust of those the leader serves. In this sense, betrayal is both a private and public weapon, invisible yet profoundly influential. Even the most calculated leader must eventually confront the human cost of misjudged loyalty. In private, he wrestled with decisions, wondering if earlier vigilance could have prevented the unraveling. This reflection reveals the dual tragedy of leadership, the loss of power and the burden of hindsight. Historians note that the human mind rarely forgives itself for failing to anticipate betrayal. As betrayal became overt, those who orchestrated it consolidated power. Ministries, armies, and policy levers shifted under their influence. By the time the leader recognized the full extent of the threat, it was too late to respond effectively. History demonstrates that consolidation of power is both the goal and the consequence of strategic betrayal. Once achieved, reversal is almost impossible. Exile was inevitable. Political authority lost, reputation tarnished, and allies in control. He withdrew into solitude. Yet history preserves the complexity of his legacy: vision unfulfilled, brilliance undermined, lessons encoded for future generations. Even in absence, the impact of leadership persists. Policies, reforms, and ideas carry forward, while the narrative of betrayal informs political thought for centuries. Leadership is a human endeavor as much as a political one. Brilliance alone cannot secure longevity. Loyalty, trust, and vigilance are equally vital. Ambition, unchecked, can undermine even the most capable ruler. The story of this leader is a meditation on power, its fragility, its ethical demands, and the ever-present tension between human nature and governance. Ultimately, the narrative endures as a timeless lesson. Power is a responsibility, loyalty is a currency, and betrayal is a force that can shape nations. The leader who lost everything to his own allies reminds us that human ambition can both build and destroy, that vigilance is necessary, and that history remembers both triumph and failure with unflinching clarity. In reflecting on his journey, we understand that authority is never permanent. Trust must be owned and safeguarded, and the greatest threats are often found within the circle of those we call allies.